There are 11 pistols in Mass Effect 3 that your squadmates can use, so which one is the best for them? This video is the last of my series, where I test the effectiveness of different weapons on your team by measuring how long it took them to complete an Noveria fighter base mission with a specific weapon. The squadmates here were Edie and Liara. Liara had warp ammo that was shared with the rest of the squad at half its strength. Every test was done with a level 5 variant of the weapon, and with a few exceptions that will be mentioned down the line, used a level 5 magazine upgrade and level 5 piercing mode. With the exception of sniper rifles, every category of weapons has one or two guns that seem to be completely broken on your squad. For pistols, that is the Talon, an interesting weapon that fires multiple projectiles at once, much like a shotgun. It seemed like a really interesting niche with tons of potential, but your team apparently mulls over the ethical quandaries of shooting at another human being whenever they have a chance to fire. While the Talon is capable of quickly firing several shots before reloading, that is not something your squad does. Instead, they will fire the shots so slowly that even the single-shot sniper rifles have a faster rate of fire. It can deal enough damage to almost one-shot basic troopers at close range, but the time it takes for that to happen usually means that your team will often get killed before they can do the same to the enemy. The Talon does deal a bit of extra damage against shields, and I had hoped that it would do better against the Atlas. Maybe the larger target would snap your team out of their malaise, but it just wasn't the case. Never ever give your team the Talon, it is much better in your hands. I was so close to just calling it quits with the N7 Eagle and shoving it into the borderline unusable category, along with the Talons and Hornets, but somehow suffered through it. My efforts were rewarded with a mission time that consumed half an hour of my life, along with 5 GB of space on my hard drive. The Eagle is the only fully automatic pistol in the game, but that doesn't matter for your team as they still fire it in very short bursts. While the gun does have low recoil, it deals very low damage, and as we saw with the Locust, high accuracy doesn't make a weapon any better on your friends. Overall, the Eagle feels like an extremely watered down SMG that had the second longest Atlas kill timer of all the weapons that actually made it through the testing. To the surprise of absolutely no one, the arc pistol will not have its charge functionality utilized, which means that it will never achieve its potential one-hit headshots or effectiveness against armor. Your team will fire the weak, uncharged shots in very short bursts, and it somehow managed to have the worst Atlas kill time out of all the weapons within the tests. The 8th spot belongs to the Scorpion, a weapon that is much better as a support weapon than as a dedicated source of damage. I used an extended barrel mode over the piercing mode here. The weapon fires projectiles that stick to enemies and surfaces. When fired onto enemies, they explode a few seconds later and stagger the target and anyone around them, but the damage is still pretty low. When fired onto a wall, the projectile can detonate immediately when an enemy gets near it, so even misses have the potential to contribute. I can say from personal experience that the Scorpion is very effective at priming the effects of ammo powers, like from squad cryo ammo, so the weapon definitely has a specialty for crowd control and setting of power combos. I didn't expect much from the Predator, and in this regard, it didn't disappoint. It really has practically nothing going for it when looking at the raw stats. It does look as if the weapon is fired faster than the player is capable of, creating the appearance of an automatic SMG or assault rifle, but there are no squadmate quirks that make the Predator stand out among the rest. For the Carnifex, your squadmates will usually fire 2 shots before going back to cover. Damage is comparable to the Viper, but since the weapon is fired slower, and because pistol users don't have a lot of gun damage boosts, it is kind of underwhelming, only removing around 2 bars of health per shot. I sometimes see it recommended for your team, but I don't really agree with that. The Phalanx is like a Predator that deals 2 times as much damage, but with half the fire rate. On paper, their DPS is nearly identical, and their performances before the Atlas were therefore very similar, but the higher damage of the Phalanx makes it better against armor, and ultimately give the weapon a better mission time. As the Acolyte fires explosive shots, I used an extended barrel mode over the piercing one. Its special gimmick is the massively increased damage against shields and barriers, and while it was capable of knocking out a Centurion's shield in a single hit, it still took 20 seconds to deplete the one on the Atlas. This is mainly due to its low rate of fire, and the fact that the weapon has to be charged before it is fired, which thankfully your squad does too. While the damage against unshielded targets isn't spectacular, taking around 3 to 4 hits to kill a basic trooper, it can not only stagger enemies caught in the blast, but also stun them on direct hits, much like the effects of disruptor ammo, making them vulnerable to follow-up shots. It isn't as effective against the bigger shield of the Atlas like I had hoped, but still faster than most other weapons, so there's another niche use for it against bosses. The third spot, the Paladin, is fired in bursts of 2, much like the Carnifex, but unlike the Carnifex, the damage is high enough to potentially kill with that single burst if one of the shots hits the head. Its higher damage does make it one of the best choices in the category against the Atlas, but keep in mind that the top 3 weapons in the other categories had a mission time that was at least 3 minutes faster, and they usually had a faster Atlas kill time too. I think it just goes to show how underwhelming the pistols are in general, and outside the niche uses I mentioned on a few of them, you're probably better off letting Edie and Liara use their SMGs. Though the last 2 entries kind of redeem the category. The runner-up on the list is the Executioner, and in a lot of ways you can compare it to the Mantis. Both are single shot weapons that take 2 shots to kill, but the Executioner is reloaded faster, which gives it a higher rate of fire. As the extended clip upgrade will not round out the magazine enough to fire 2 shots, I used an extended barrel mode instead. Unlike the single shot sniper rifles, it doesn't seem that your squad will consciously shoot the Executioner through cover, even though the weapon is capable of that without mods. The performance against basic enemies was mostly in line with what I expected, but against the Atlas, it was an entirely different story. With the exception of the comically overpowered Typhoon, the Executioner has the fastest Atlas kill time out of all the weapons, beating out even the heavy sniper rifles, and keep in mind, neither the weapon or the warp ammo dealt any extra damage to its shield. This is definitely one of those specialty weapons that you can tell your team to swap to when encountering armored enemies, and given how underwhelming pistols have been thus far, its performance against the Atlas kinda blew my mind. Gentlemen, I believe we found another Typhoon. The Suppressor has an insane headshot damage multiplier, and even classes without damage boosts can achieve one-shot headshots, or at least come very close to scoring them. I had zero hopes for the Suppressor, as your squad doesn't seem to consciously go for headshots with other weapons, but as soon as they landed, Edie and Liara melted through any assault troopers unlucky enough to not be in cover. Even the shielded Centurions went down much faster than you'd think, and I initially thought that the Suppressor might be the only weapon where your team will actively aim for the head with. But even the Atlas kill time was bizarrely fast, despite taking no bonus headshot damage from hitting its weak points. I am genuinely unsure if the Suppressor's insane performance comes from your squad actively going for headshots, if the weapon simply has some broken damage calculations, or maybe even both, but either way, it has no right being as good as it is. If it weren't for the lowish initial mag size of 6, then this thing could possibly outdamage the Typhoon, at least on non-boss enemies. I haven't seen anyone talk about the Suppressor in the hands of your squadmates, but maybe we should. Perhaps it is time for Liara to ascend to godhood. With the glaring exception that is the Suppressor, most pistols feel kind of underpowered in general. Other than some niche uses, it is usually better for Edie and Liara to use equivalent SMGs. And that's all the weapons in the game tested and analyzed for your team. If you haven't seen the videos on the other weapon types, I'll put the links to them into the description. I hope this series helps your next playthroughs.